He stood up at the dinner table, pointed at me in front of the whole family, and shouted, "You're a disgrace." His voice filled the room, and no one said a word. I sat there in silence, holding back tears until Grandpa slowly rose from his seat, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "That's enough. It's time for the truth." And what he revealed next left everyone in that room completely speechless. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. The laughter echoed in my ears, cruel and cutting, as my father smirked at me from across the dining room. The long, polished mahogany table stretched between us, a battlefield. I never chose to fight on. My mother sat beside him, her expression indifferent, nodding. Along with his every word, "You're a disgrace to this family. Just a failure." My father sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Your brother is the only child. I'm proud of my brother." Mason leaned back in his chair with a smug grin, basking in the attention like a king being praised in his own court. He had always been the golden boy, the untouchable one, and me, I was nothing in their eyes. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my emotions in check. I wouldn't let them see me break, not here. Not in front of all these people, our extended family, business partners, and so-called friends, who had gathered for what was supposed to be a peaceful family dinner. But the air was thick with judgment. Whispers ran through the room, pitying glances shot my way. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others, like my aunt and uncle, watched with cold amusement. I had been here before, ridiculed, mocked, dismissed, but this time felt different. This time it felt final. And then my grandfather, the patriarch of the family, slowly rose to his feet. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. My father turned to him, looking annoyed. "Dad, sit down. You don't need to defend her. She made her choices. She could have had a comfortable life like Mason, but instead, she chose some meaningless job, a pathetic little apartment scraping by, when she could have had everything." My mother exhaled, sharply, shaking her head as though I was the biggest disappointment she had ever known. Grandpa didn't sit. His old yet steady hands rested on the table as he gazed at my father, his expression unreadable. "Then it's time you all knew the truth," he said, his voice calm but firm. My heart pounded in my chest. What truth? What was he talking about? My father rolled his eyes. "What truth, Dad? That she's a disgrace. We all know that already." A sharp, disapproving look flashed across Grandpa's face. "You're a fool, Nathan," he said, his voice as sharp as a blade. "And you've been blind for too long." The room tensed. My father's arrogance faltered just a little. "What are you talking about?" my mother asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Grandpa looked around the table, making sure everyone was paying attention. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned to me. "You're the only one in this family who has earned my respect," he said. I stiffened my breath, catching in my throat. A murmur spread through the room. "What?" My brother's smugness cracked, my father's brow furrowed, my mother's lips parted in surprise. Grandpa continued, his voice unwavering. "You think you're so great, Nathan? You think Mason is your pride and joy? Let me ask you something. What has Mason ever built with his own hands? What has he sacrificed for? What has he achieved on his own?" Mason's face darkened. "Grandpa, what the hell? Be quiet!" Grandpa snapped, his voice thundering through the room. Mason's mouth clamped shut. "I've been watching for years," Grandpa went on. "I watched you shower Mason with praise while tearing her down. I watched you celebrate his every achievement, no matter how small, while belittling everything she has done. And yet, she never stopped. She never gave up. She carved a path for herself without your money, without your approval, without your name." It felt my chest tighten, a rush of emotions threatening to spill over. "You all sit here looking down on her," Grandpa said, his gaze sweeping over the table. "But do any of you even know what she's accomplished? Have any of you bothered to ask?" A heavy silence settled in. Grandpa turned to me, his eyes kind yet fierce. "Tell them," he urged. "Tell them what you've done." I hesitated, my hands trembling slightly. "Grandpa, you've spent years hiding your achievements because of them," he said, "because they made you feel unworthy, but not tonight." I took a shaky breath, glancing around the table. My father's face was unreadable. My mother's expression had softened slightly, though skepticism still lingered. Mason looked ready to explode. I finally spoke. "I built my own company," I said, my voice stronger than I expected, from the ground up, with no handouts, no family name, no connections. A ripple of shock spread through the guests. My father scoffed. "You expect us to believe that?" Grandpa cut in. "Believe it, Nathan, because I invested in her company, and guess what? It's now more successful than yours. Gasps filled the room. My father's face turned pale. My mother's hands trembled lightly as she reached for her glass of water. Mason's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might break. I straightened my spine. My confidence growing. You never care enough to ask. Never cared enough to see me for who I am. You are so busy propping Mason up that you didn't notice the daughter, he wrote off, is the one who actually built something real. My father looked at Grandpa, desperation creeping into his voice. Dad, you're joking, right? This is some kind of no grandpa, said his voice absolute. And here's the best part. Nathan, she didn't just build a company, she built an empire that starting tomorrow will own the controlling shares of your company. My father's breath hitched. My brother shot up from his chair. That's not possible. Grandpa smiled, a look of satisfaction in his eyes. But it is, I made sure of it. The weight of his words crashed over the room like a tidal wave. My father slumped back in his chair, his hands shaking. My mother looked like she might faint. Mason's confidence shattered before my eyes, and me for the first time in my life. I felt seeing the daughter they called a disgrace was now the one holding all the power. And I wasn't done yet. The silence in the room was suffocating. The once arrogant expressions on my father's and Mason's faces had crumbled into pure disbelief. My mother, who had always nodded along with my father's cruelty, stared at me with wide eyes as if seeing me for the first time. I pushed back my chair and stood slowly. Deliberately, my heart was pounding. But I wouldn't let them see a single crack. Not tonight. You think you're the only ones who can play the game? I asked, my voice carrying through the massive dining room. You've spent years laughing at me, treating me like an outsider in my own family, but guess what? I wasn't wasting my time while you were too busy gloating over Mason's so-called success. I was out there building something real. Mason shot up from his seat, his hands slamming against the table. This is a joke. There's no way Grandpa would invest in her over me. Grandpa simply smiled, his piercing gaze locking onto Mason. And why not? What have you ever done to earn my respect, boy? Every deal you've made, every position you've held was handed to you by your father. You would last a day in the real world without him wiping your messes clean. Mason's face turned red, his lips pressing into a thin line. He wanted to argue, but he had nothing. No real accomplishments, no real experience, just the privilege my father had fed him his whole life. My father finally found his voice. This isn't possible, he muttered. His voice hoarse. There's no way she could take controlling shares of my company. I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head. Oh, but I did, I said. For the last 3 years I've been watching, studying. I saw your weaknesses, your over-reliance on Mason. Bad investments you made trying to cover for his failures. I knew your company was on the brink of collapse before you even realized it. My father's fists clenched. You're lying. Grandpa reached into a suit jacket and pulled out a small envelope. With slow precision, he slid it across the table. See for yourself, my father hesitated before snatching up the envelope. His fingers trembled as he opened it, revealing a stack of legal documents. His eyes scanned the pages, his face losing what little color it had left. This isn't possible, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Mason yanked the papers from him, his own eyes darting across the words. His breath came out ragged. No way. His head snapped toward me. You set us up. I tilted my head. Set you up? No, you did this to yourselves. I just took advantage of the opportunity you handed me on a silver platter. My mother finally spoke, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. You really did all of this? There was something in her tone, regret, perhaps uncertainty. I met her gaze, my heart hammering. Yes, I said. I did. The weight of my words pressed down on the room like a storm cloud about to burst. Then Grandpa delivered the final blow. As of tomorrow, he said, your positions in the company are officially terminated. You and Mason will no longer have any authority over the business. My father looked up, his mouth parting in shock. Dad, you can't do this. Grandpa's eyes darkened. Oh, but I can. I've watched you turn into a man who values money and power more than family. You raised Mason to be just like you, a man who expects the world to fall at his feet without lifting a single finger to earn it. I won't let this family's legacy crumble under your arrogance, Mason. Turned to my mother, desperation in his voice. Mom, say something. You can't just let this happen. But my mother remained silent, her gaze fixed on me. I saw the emotions wearing inside her, the doubt, the realization, the truth she had ignored for years, staring her right in the face for the first time in my life. She had no words, and I had never felt stronger. I straightened my shoulders, locking eyes with my father one last time. "You spent years making me feel worthless," I said. "But the real failure in this room isn't me, it's the man who couldn't see what was right in front of him." And with that, I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving them to drown in the truth. I walked out of that dining room with my head held high, but my heart was racing. Years of humiliation, of being dismissed and belittled, had just flipped in an instant. The weight of my revenge settled over me like a storm brewing in the distance. But this wasn't over, not yet. I stepped outside the cool night air, hitting my skin like a much-needed reset. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out. A message from my assistant popped up. "Everything is in place. The official announcement goes live tomorrow morning at 800 a.m. I smirked. Perfect. Behind me, the doors slammed open. Heavy footsteps rushed toward me, and I turned just in time to see Mason storming down the steps, his face twisted in rage. "You think you won," he spat. "You think you can just take everything and walk away like some kind of hero?" I arched a brow, unimpressed. "I don't think Mason." I know his hands curled into fists, but I didn't flinch. He had always been all talk, no action. "You set me up," he accused, his voice shaking. "You made me look like a fool." I crossed my arms. "No, Mason, you did that all on your own. I just stopped covering for you." His jaw clenched so hard, I thought it might snap. "You think you're better than me now, huh? You think Grandpa's approval suddenly makes you someone important?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I was always someone, Mason, and Dad just refused to see it, and now I don't need your approval." His face drained of color before he could respond. The sound of heels clicking against the pavement interrupted us. My mother stood a few feet away, her expression unreadable. Her usual cold demeanor had cracked, replaced by something almost hesitant. "Let's go, Mason," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Mason didn't move. He just stood there, glaring at me like he wanted to tear me apart. But he knew deep down, he knew there was nothing he could do, not anymore. With one last look of pure resentment, he turned and stormed off, pushing past my mother as he left. She stayed behind. We stood in silence, the tension between us thick as smoke. "I didn't know," she finally said. I let out a dry laugh. "You didn't want to know." She flinched. Maybe she admitted, maybe I didn't for a moment. I thought that was it, that she would turn and follow Mason without another word. But then she surprised me. "You were always stronger than I gave you credit for," she murmured. "Stronger than all of us." I didn't know how to respond onto that. Not after years of being nothing in her eyes, so I just nodded. I know she inhaled sharply, like she wanted to say more, but in the end, she just turned and walked away. I watched her go, my chest tight with emotions. I wasn't ready to unpack. This wasn't the ending I had imagined. But maybe it was the one I needed, and tomorrow I would show the world exactly who. It was the morning after the family dinner. The world woke up to news that shook the business industry to its core. Breaking: corporate giant faces major takeover as young entrepreneurs secures controlling shares. Industry shakeup. CEO Nathan Carter and Son, Ed. After silent power shift, the rise of an underdog. How she outsmarted her own family. I scrolled through the news articles, watching as the headlines painted the picture of my victory. Every news channel, every financial website, every social media platform was buzzing about the stunning reversal of power in my father's company, the same company he had spent his life building, and that he had never imagined I would have the strength to take from him. And yet here, why was my phone vibrating nonstop with calls and messages? Some were from people who had once ignored me, but now suddenly wanted to meet. Investors who had dismissed me before were now eager to align with my business. Former colleagues and employees of my father's company, even people I hadn't spoken to in years, were all trying to get in touch. Ignored most of them, but then one name appeared on my screen that made me pause. "Grandpa," I answered immediately, mourning. "Grandpa there in shambles," he said, without preamble. His voice held an unmistakable note of satisfaction. "Nathan and Mason showed Up at the office first thing this morning, demanding to see the board security, had to escort them out. I let out a slow breath, allowing his words to settle over me. I had been preparing for this moment, but hearing it was something else. They, really, thought they could stop this? I asked. Grandpa chuckled. Nathan was always blinded by arrogance, and Mason was too sheltered to see reality, they assumed. They were untouchable. He paused. They know you've won, but they're not going to go down quietly. Be prepared. I already am, I said firmly. I heard Grandpa's sigh on the other end. Are you ready for today? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me more. The Never Today wasn't just about taking control of the company. It was about defining my rule. Unlike my father, I wasn't here to hoard power or crush competition. I had bigger plans, and they started today. I arrived at the corporate office at 9 o'clock. A.m. Sharp, it was the first time. I had ever walked through these doors not as an outcast, but as the one in charge. The security guards at the entrance, who had once ignored me, now straightened their posture. As I passed the elevator ride to the top, floor felt surreal. I had spent years thinking I would never be allowed inside the space as my father and brother ruled over so effortlessly. But now I wasn't just stepping into the boardroom. I was stepping into my destiny as I entered the massive glass-walled room. Every board member was already seated waiting for me. Some of them looked nervous, others curious, and a few openly doubtful. And then, of course, there was my father and Mason. They had managed to sneak their way in. Mason sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, his face twisted in barely contained rage. My father, however, was composed to compose. That meant he had a plan. Good morning, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. It was the same seat my father had occupied for years. I saw him stiffen as I took his spot. We're here today to discuss the transition of power. I continued, as you all know, the company has undergone a restructuring effective. Immediately I will assume the position of CEO. Murmurs spread across the room. That's not happening. My father's voice was quiet, but sharp. This is still my company. I didn't even blink check the legal documents. Your shares were sold. You hold nothing. His eyes darkened, but he forced a smirk. You think you can run this place? You have no experience at this level. I leaned forward, and yet my independent business has been more profitable in the last 3 years than this company has been under your leadership. You let Mason drive it into the ground. While you were too blind to see it, Mason's face turned red. You little. Grandpa's voice cut through the tension. Sit down. Mason's mouth snapped shut. I took advantage of the silence. Let me make one thing clear, I said, my voice unwavering. I am not my father. I don't run businesses through nepotism and arrogance. I earned my place here, and if anyone here doesn't believe in my leadership, you're welcome to resign. No one moved, not one board member. Even the ones who had doubted me looked reluctant to challenge me now. My father exhaled slowly, realization hitting him like a brick wall. You really did it, he muttered. His voice was hoarse now, his confidence cracking. You really took everything. I looked him straight in the eye. No, Dad, you lost everything. I just stopped letting you hold me back for the first time in my life. He had no response after the meeting ended. Security escorted my father and Mason out of the building. This time it was official. I watched from my office window as they stood on the sidewalk, completely lost. My father, the man who had once ruled this company with an iron grip, now had nothing. Mason, who had spent his whole life believing he was untouchable, looked completely shattered. Mason turned back once, his expression full of hatred, but I didn't flinch. He knew it was over. They disappeared into the streets, and just like that, I was free. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline. This was my future now, my empire, and for the first time in my life, I won. For years, I lived in the shadow of my father's disappointment. No matter what I did, it was never good enough. Every mistake I made was amplified, every success dismissed. And on that night, when the family gathered for dinner, I thought maybe things would be different. But as always, he found a way to turn the spotlight into a shame parade. In front of cousins, aunts, and even close friends. He called me a disgrace, listed my failures like punchlines, hoping to get nods and laughs. But what he didn't expect was the sound of a chair sliding back behind him. Grandpa stood up, calm but firm, and said, "It's time someone told the truth." The room went silent, and then he spoke. Not to me, but to my father. "You act like you're perfect, but I remember when you were his age. You made worse choices, and I covered for you. I protected you. But instead of passing that protection forward, you turned your own son into a target." The table froze. No one moved. Grandpa continued, "You never gave him credit for surviving. Storms you created. You never saw that the strength he has didn't come from you. It came in spite of you." My father stared, stunned, his face pale, and for the first time in my life, I saw him speechless. Grandpa walked around the table, placed his hand on my shoulder, and said, "You're not a disgrace. You're the proof that we can grow past pain." In that moment, I didn't just feel seen, I felt free. The weight I had carried for years lifted with every word Grandpa said. And as the night went on, no one mocked me again. Because when truth walks in, pride sits down. And that day, the truth didn't come with anger or noise. It came from an old man who had seen it all and decided it was finally time to set the record straight. And he did, with love, clarity, and the kind of truth that can't be denied.